your host, Sabrina Salvati. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. All right. Happy Friday, guys. Welcome to Sabs podcast. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. I have a special guest with me tonight. Marcus Cage is here. He is the host of The Political Matrix and What I've Been Thinking with Marcus Cage. Welcome back, Marcus.
Thank you so much. I'm always happy to sit down with you, Sabby.
Thanks so much. So Marcus and I have a story to tell you about that I don't think many people are covering. And I want to give a quick, shout out to Afeni because she was the one that sent me this article. But it's about an experiment that happened in Philadelphia. So I'm actually going to go ahead and get started with that story. I want to read a little bit about it here. Philadelphia apologizes for experiments on Black inmates. Okay, so this came out in October. The city of Philadelphia issued an apology Thursday for unethical medical experiments performed on mostly Black inmates at its Holmesburg Prison from the 1950s through the 1970s. The move comes after community activists and families of some of those inmates raised the need for a formal apology. It also follows a string of apologies from various U.S. cities over historically racist policies or wrongdoing in the wake of the nationwide racial reckoning after the killing of George Floyd by a Minneapolis police officer. The city allowed University of Pennsylvania researcher Dr. Albert Klingman to conduct the dermatological, biochemical, and pharmaceutical experiments that intentionally exposed about 300 inmates to viruses, fungus, asbestos, and chemical agents, including dioxin, a component of Agent Orange. The vast majority of Klingman's experiments were performed on Black men, many of whom were awaiting trial and trying to save money for bail, and many of whom were illiterate. Now, before I go further into this, Marcus, chime in here because I know you were telling me there's a book about this as well.
Yes, the book is by Alan Kornblum or something. It's called Acre of Skin, and it just basically goes off the quote which the doctor said, and the quote was, "All I saw before me were acres of skin. It was like a farmer seeing fertile field for the first time." And so in the book, it has a little bit of discrepancies as far as the numbers, especially because like it gives like 300 for like just for dermatology and issues like that. But when it starts getting to some of the more stuff like the different acids that were used and the Ancient Orange and the dioxin, and I mean, it was stuff for like foot fungus that they were doing. And this was contracted by major corporations, businesses, and the US government also over this, easily 20-year period. They called this prison the Terror Dome.
It goes on to say Klingman, who would go on to pioneer the acne and wrinkle treatment Retin A, died in 2010. Many of the former inmates would have lifelong scars and health issues from the experiments. A group of the inmates filed a lawsuit against the university and Klingman in 2000 that was ultimately thrown out because of a statute of limitations. So they tried to get some type of accountability here, but I guess you have to have you have to file within a certain timeline, depending on the event. And it goes on to say Philadelphia Mayor Jim Kenney said in the apology that the experiments were exploited a vulnerable population and the impact of the medical racism that has extended for generations. Now, Marcus, this is one of those things where I've told people this before. Obviously, this is not new. We know about the Tuskegee experiment. For those who are not aware, in reference to gynecology, how do you think a lot of those treatments and those practices became available? They were actually experimenting on Black women.
Yep. No anesthesia either. So let's keep that in mind. They were literally just taking knives to these women, and no anesthesia, not like here, take a shot of alcohol, nothing, and just inflicting massive pain. And it started with this. Later on, Woodrow Wilson started working on, what was it, chemical warfare. Hey, what's up, Colin? Good to see you, brother. But the chemical warfare that they wanted to work on, as far as possible wars, stuff that they were going to do in World War I and possibly later on, which eventually World War II, is where some of this experimentation happened. And so, you know how you said like retinol A?
Mm-hmm.
Well, think of what that sounds like. We know a certain chemical called retinol, which a lot of women will use for like a facial treatment. It comes from these experiments. And so when we start looking at the totality of what they were doing, mustard gas, you ever wonder where they get these studies and they start talking about, well, cannabis isn't that dangerous and this is that dangerous, and where they're getting this stuff from? A lot of it comes from this experiment and experiments like this.
That's right. That's right. It goes on to say, without excuse, we formally and officially extend a sincere apology to those who were subjected to this inhumane and horrific abuse. We are also sorry it took far too long to hear these words. Last year, the University of Pennsylvania issued a formal apology and took Klingman's name off some honorifics like an annual lecture series and professorship. The university also directed research funds to fellows focused on dermatological issues in people of color. So for those just joining, Philadelphia apologizes for experiments on Black inmates. And the gentleman that you see here in the picture, Edward Anthony, speaks of his time at Holmesburg Prison in Philadelphia and the test in which he participated in while he was an inmate. So he was one of the people that they experimented on. And I just think it's nice that they apologize, but my issue is like they should have done more. Like there's no type of monetary, compensation or whatever, but we've seen this go on for too long where they just kind of use Black people to experiment on, to just like as if their lives don't matter.
Yeah, and I mean, and then it's a wonder why people are like, well, a lot of Black people aren't taking the vaccinations. Well, think about it. How long ago was Tuskegee? Not that long. How long ago was this? Not that long. And so when you know that the history that the government has a track record of doing this, and when I said U.S. government, people out there, U.S. Army is part of some of the people who were contracting them in some of these experiments, especially with the mustard gas, which the mustard gas was illegal by this time period because per the Geneva Convention in the 1920s, it had been made illegal. But yet they were using this Ancient Orange. So you guys wonder why these Vietnam vets were coming down with all these issues with Ancient Orange. This is where it came from, this studying the technology. And what they were doing is they were dropping it in mass across the whole entire fields. They didn't care if it hurt the enemies, hurt our troops, whatever. And it started with experimentation on Black people. And I want to shout out what Eric said out there. Eric said, they always come up with the statutes of limitation stuff. And they knew this was going on. The books about this stuff and documentation about this stuff, which was through multiple universities, had like the charts on that. Like they didn't have all the names, but they knew, okay, this person we tried sulfuric acid. We tried citric acid. We literally burned all the way down to their arm, down to the bone. We put poison ivy on this person. We put poison ivy on people's genitalia, oak, and all this stuff, and just let them suffer to see what was going to happen. And this is what these people were doing. I mean, it's mind-boggling to think how you could do this for 20 years. And that's why I say that number, the amount of people who were able to be held at a given time was about 1,200. So you do the math, 1,200 residents, 20 years, that 300 number just falls apart on its face right there. Because per this man's own statement, he saw it as acres that he could just, acres of skin he could go through. And so you know that he didn't just do one or two and then like, oh, well, you know, my conscience, I'm not. No, he was doing everything he could. And Dow Chemicals, remember, a lot of people who didn't take the Pfizer vaccination, which vaccination did they take? Johnson & Johnson. Johnson & Johnson was one of these companies which was testing stuff here on them.
My whole thing is there no one that investigates the prisons? Like, is there no one that comes in to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to do and they're not? That's a big part of the problem.
Yeah. I mean, granted, I didn't work in prison. I worked in pretrial, but so I'm a little bit familiar with the correction system, working in the field for about three and a half years. And it's very little monitoring from the outside what goes on in there. The only monitoring is that, okay, are you making sure to do your wellness checks, to peek in the window so the inmates aren't necessarily harming each other? On the pretrial level, it's a little bit more enforcement of that. But once you get to the prison level and you start dealing with, like we were dealing with numbers, say one officer to about 40 residents. That's what the nice name we like to call it. Residents, not inmates. They're residents. Mm-hmm. It's like this is a hotel, you know, it's nice and comfy. And so we would have about 40 residents. When you get up to post-trial and actual prison, which some of them, depending on their sentencing, if it's not that long, they might do it in a pretrial facility. But most of the time, when they actually get to prison or penitentiary, you're dealing with maybe about like 10 officers for 300 inmates at a given time on a given shift. And so many holes in the room. That's the reason why you hear these accounts of rape, people getting stabbed. I mean, how can somebody sit there and have time to build shanks and stuff? Because there's a lot of supervision that's not being taken. And there's blind spots throughout all these prisons. Plus, when you have government contracts who are doing this, and keep in mind, a lot of these prisons are private prisons too.
That's right. So there's profit to be made. That's another thing where the prison system, like there's profit there. That's why we need to get rid of like for profit prisons. It's very, it's disturbing. I want to show people here also, because you can actually watch the documentary. Let me go ahead and share this here. I can't play it because it does have copyright, but Acres of Skin, the documentary, it's on YouTube. So you can actually watch this to see more about the history behind it. But it's just, it makes you wonder what other things have happened like all this time that we just may not know about. And why is this coming out now?
Well, I think why it's coming out right now is because they know it's right past the statute of limitations on some of this stuff. That's the reason why when you hear these dumps like the JFK, files, and they'll be like, "Oh, we're releasing some of the redacted files." Well, because they know that this person is probably died and this person is past this, and they know that, okay, you can't attack these people. It's a way of protecting the powerful. That's what's going on here, because they're because they know not only would that doctor, that's the reason why, okay, he's been dead. Well, now it's been enough time where maybe even his wife, who they probably could have came after, maybe she's passed on also. And so they wait till after there's no way where, okay, you can't come after him criminally. So now you can't even come after him civilly. And so they're like, well, we told you, Sabby. We told you. Yeah, you told us, but you told us you literally waited to a point when there's nothing we could do about it.
There needs to be some type of movement around this. I mean, I really do wish more people were talking about this because it's been an ongoing issue, especially for Black people, not just in the prison system, but just like using Black people for experiments. And it just, this is why, like, when people were really upset with those that didn't want to take the jab or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And they were like, no, you can't make me, you can't impose mandates on people. To me, it was just kind of like, have you sat back and thought about the fact why people may have that opinion? Like, especially Black people, considering what has been done, what they've been signed up for to do, like these experimental like treatments or whatever. And it just seemed like to me, like some people just could not understand that history has shown us that this is not a good idea. And I felt like people were just like, well, those people who choose not to do that, that's stupid. Why would you not do it? And not to be mean, but it was predominantly white people yelling at Black people, telling them like, well, you're stupid if you don't do that. And I'm like, do you not know like what has happened to us in our history?
I mean, we literally sit with a national anthem, which is actually racist. They just decide to not sing that third stanza, which hopefully, I'm pretty sure your audience is aware of what the third stanza talks about. If you don't know, go look it up. But there's been, and it's not like some people are like, well, slavery was a long time ago. Jim Crow was a long time ago. You got to look at it's went from slavery to Jim Crow, from Jim Crow to all of these different redlining laws. It's went from that to, shutting down plants and stuff in the areas. Like, it's a part where I grew up in Kansas City called Fairfax, where NAFTA, a lot of those jobs got shipped out of there. What did that do? Leave a lot of poverty. Next thing you know, there's a lot of drugs and stuff in the neighborhood. Next thing you know, you have gangster rap all of a sudden, and then you have private prisons springing up everywhere. And I'm like, you're literally showing us a roadmap to go down a negative pathway, which is being produced. Now, we could say capitalism, which is true. Capitalism does have a part to play in this, but it's what people are doing with it. Does it have to be done this way? I mean, even if we disagree with the system, do they have to target it, micro-target it to a certain demographic of people and continuously do these things like that? No, they don't, but they're doing it. Now, I'm not saying that there weren't any other demographics which were affected. I'm pretty sure that there were poor whites in there, plenty of Hispanics and Native Americans. But what I'm saying is primarily this Dr. Albert Klickman. And I say, go on ahead, Google him, look him up. We need to, perfect example. Me and Sabby actually talked about this one right before. It says Puerto Rican sterilization was a U.S. project for population control. Pacific Islanders were repeatedly near nuclear test sites. The Tuskegee Airmen. Yes, I bring this one up normally all the time. I was just telling Sabby about this, that this was happening at the same time. All of this stuff was happening from the 50s into the 70s.
Yep. There's something else I want to show people. I'm just going to share this really quick. The Atlanta Black Star, they talked about this a while back. Now, this was in 2014 where they reported this. 5 unethical medical experiments that used Black people as guinea pigs. So the first one that they mention is the Tuskegee syphilis study, which I think that's the one that, would you say, like, Marcus, that's the one that most people probably know about?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. The second one, now this one I did not know about, CDC study on experimental MMR. And it says here that like parents of the Black babies who were receiving these were not made aware of the risk of their child developing autism.
Thus, the so-called anti-vaxxer movement, and why a lot of people don't want their kids vaccinated. And we saw this huge influx of autism, which they say it has nothing to do with any kind of vaccinations, shots, or anything.
Yep. Yep. And then the third one, because they mentioned 5. This is the one I was referring to. Surgical experiments on enslaved people. And it says here, this is J. Marion Sims. Sims performed surgeries on the women without using any anesthesia because he believed the operations weren't painful enough to justify the trouble. And this is linked to the complaints we have today, where doctors, this belief that doctors have that Black people don't feel pain.
Mm-hmm. I mean, especially, and it's worse with Black women. It's a lot worse with Black women, and I just wanted to make sure to highlight that, because especially when they're going for labor issues and stuff like that, having children's, or what is it called, mastectomies, or any of these different things which are generated directly for women, because in the Black community, women tend to have a little bit more trust in going to the doctor.
Yep.
And this is the treatment that they get. That's the reason why you have in the Black community specifically that Black males typically find out about some kind of colon cancer or something, and then boom, they're dead a year later. And a lot of the women, they know what they're dealing with, but they'll still go because they know it's life or death. And these are some of the problems which you have with this whole system.
That's right. That's right. The fourth one that they mentioned. Oh, they lost that one somehow. Oh, I know what this one is. Henrietta. Did you know the story about Henrietta? Henrietta Lacks?
Now, that one I don't know. That one I don't.
So this was the woman. There's a picture of her there. I don't know why they put the picture and not the actual story. So that's weird. But this was the woman. Oh, here it is.
Oh,
the cloning of Henrietta Lacks cells. Now, this is a big one because there's a book written about it. Her family, I think they did receive monetary compensation a couple of years ago. But for people who are not aware, let me make this a little bit larger. Henrietta Lacks was the source of the first line of immortal human cells to ever be cloned in the 1950s. But the removal of her cells were done without her permission or knowledge. Doctors noticed that Lacks cells were able to stay alive for longer periods of time than previous cells. So in order to conduct research, they removed 2 samples of her cervix during surgery, one part that was healthy and one part that was cancerous. Researchers have grown roughly 20 tons of her cells since her death. In addition to harvesting Lacks cells without her knowledge or permission, researchers also published the family's medical records without their consent. So this was the one where there's a book. It's called The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. If you haven't read that book, you guys, you really need to read it. The family was on the news like when this came out a couple years ago because they had to pay them. Well, I mean, this was done without her permission.
This is, I mean, wow. I heard something about this, but I didn't know the detail and level of what was going on. But this also eerily reminds me of, I don't know if you remember that video that came out maybe a couple months back, Peter Nygaard, and it was going around like World Star Hip Hop. Basically, he was sitting at a table with a bunch of young Black women, and he was trying to buy any kind of like cell DNA that he could from them. I mean, he was saying that, you know, we'll take, I don't want to gross anybody out here, but he's saying that he will take female waste products.
Mm-hmm.
And he's talking about how much for you to sell me your eggs and all kind of different stuff. And he's literally like sitting there throwing out numbers to these women like it's a casual, no big deal conversation. I mean,
that's right.
It's disturbing as hell listening to it.
That's right. And the jam in here is spot on. She's the reason we can study cancer now. She saved millions of lives, but barely any pay or recognition. That's a huge story, you guys. Like, definitely read that book if you haven't had a chance to. I think you can get it at the library too. And then there's another one here. And this is Sarah Bartman.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. Sarah Bartman was only 20 years old when her life changed forever. She was one of two Khoikhoi, I hope I said that correctly, women who were put on display across Europe as part of a freak show attraction. The women were referred to as Hottentot Venus. Hottentot used to be the name used to refer to the Khoi people, but it is now considered to be a racist term, and Venus was in reference to the Roman goddess of love. In the early 1800s, Bartman was the subject of scientific and medical research in France. Despite constant legal battles to try to get the woman released back to her home, she remained in European custody for what they considered to be scientific research. After she died, researchers kept her sexual organs and her brain and put them on display.
Mm-hmm. And this goes into the human zoos, which they were having in Europe. And when it's talking about the Khoi, for those who are not familiar, she would be like one of the tribes of people out of like South Africa. Nelson Mandela. Mm-hmm. His people would trace back to like the Khoisan people. She would have been of those people. And so you had a couple of different groups within the Khoisan, and she would have been one of those tribes. And so, this is just one of the things they did in these human zoos, which you definitely should look at. They literally went throughout all kinds of different parts of Africa and took random people and decided to treat them like they did this poor Sarah here.
Absolutely horrible. And I think there's one more, if I didn't get to, oh, those are all of them. Yeah. So that was five unethical medical experiments used Black people as guinea pigs. And it's really unfortunate. Like I said before, a lot of people don't know about this stuff. I know even when I was in school, like my history classes, they didn't teach us. They taught us about the Tuskegee experiment, but not the other ones that I just mentioned.
Yeah. Well, the reason why they didn't go into the other ones and they taught us about Tuskegee is they had to tell us about at least one of these, and then let us get our outrage out on this one. And that one of the other ones, it's not as gruesome because what they did is they just denied treatment, and so they allowed people to die horribly. That's still bad enough, but they wanted to hide the ones where it was much more brutal. I mean, like a lot of modern dentistry got it starts from slavery also, and what they were doing, yanking teeth out and things like that. And then another one, which is often forgot about, not talked about. I don't know about you all out there, but I know for me, definitely one of the things which I definitely learned in school, learned about, and every year we learned about it a lot in detail, the Holocaust.
Yeah.
At the very same time, King Leopold III, who was in the Congo, killing, let's see, I think the number was like 20 million in the Congo. And he was chopping off arms. He was castrating. I mean, it was extremely brutal. And that's not even heard of. Oh, you're so welcome.
Terrible, terrible, terrible. So these are the things, like, you guys need to hear about these stories. And I feel like there's not enough, people talking about it. Like I said, they're not teaching kids about this in school.
No. That's the reason why I have so much of an issue when people start talking about, critical race theory. It's not about critical race theory. It's about trying to teach you the history that's not being taught. Mm-hmm. I mean, how many of us in school learned about Christopher Columbus, right? How many of you guys know that in his book that he wrote that he used to like to rape young girls between the age of 6 to 9?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people probably don't know that part, though.
Oh.
A lot of people don't know about certain conquistadors, which said that literally the day I got there to the day I left, my sword did not stop swinging. I mean, how many people out there know about gator bait? They literally used to take black slave women's children, put them on a rope, and throw them out there to try to catch gators so that they can make shoes and belts and stuff like that. Or about the sugar canes. We always hear about cotton.
Mm-hmm.
But the sugar canes had a much higher death rate because the temperature was so brutal. And so you literally just had them dropping dead. All right, drag this body out of the way, push another one up. And so they were going through slaves so fast in the Caribbean. Nobody talks about that. And then we also forget 60% of the slave trade out of West Africa went to South America.
Mm-hmm.
A large chunk went to Brazil. Like 50% of the slaves went to Brazil out of West Africa.
That's why you have Afro-Brazilians.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right. A lot of people don't talk about that.
All the way into Colombia and Nicaragua and all of these different areas, all the way through, literally through the whole Caribbean. The only thing that separated was which slave master you went to. First, South America was mostly the Spaniards. Then it switched. Brazil switched to the Portuguese after the Spaniards were kicked out. A good chunk of the middle of the country was French slavery until the Louisiana Purchase, when then they were sold into the rest of America. And then slavery changed dramatically for those people. It's kind of weird. It's like the French were super brutal on the island of Haiti and what's Haiti and Dominican Republic. But they were somehow nicer in Louisiana. That was only for a period until they sold. Once they sold and it was into Americans' hands, those slaves who were going to college, yes, there were slaves that were going to college. There were slaves who owned businesses where they could sell to other slaves. But once that ended, they got the same treatment as anybody who was over in Mississippi and Texas, all that.
That's right. And Silver brought up something here I think is important. That's why reparations is so important. We need to honor 40 acres, 1 mule, and the 500 broken treaties. And I do want to add, reparations isn't just about slavery. That also includes Jim Crow.
Yeah. And sundown town, black codes. I mean, we can keep going on and on and on. Remember last year when I had you on my show and we were talking about like Black history, and we went into I did a little short video, like either I did it before or after, or maybe I showed some of it, where I was going through the massacres, and I just named them and threw out some numbers really quickly. There are so many. I mean, we talk about Greenville, Oklahoma, Tulsa. We talk about Black Wall Street, but we don't talk about the same thing happened in Chicago. We don't talk about the same thing happened in Massachusetts. We don't talk about the same thing happened in Louisiana. We don't talk about the same thing happening in New York, in Florida. It happened all over the country. There were so many of these massacres, and we hear nothing about them.
Yeah, there were multiple Black Wall Streets. I mean, Tulsa is the one that most people know about. That's the one that's talked about the most. But there were multiple ones. Every time, basically in this country, every time that Black people tried to acquire wealth and build their own communities, it was burned down. Yep.
Well, and that's the crazy part to me. It was like, okay, well, and I wanted to add on when somebody who made the comment about 40 acres and a mule, it was actually 40 acres, a mule, and a rifle. They took that rifle part back, though. They were like, well, maybe there's the 40 acres and a mule, because you would have needed a rifle a lot of times to hunt. And so that's how a lot of people still were surviving, going out, I go hunt, I get me a deer, whatever, deer, a wild boar, whatever they were hunting. And, even buffalo. And so that's not focused on. And so what they said was, well, damn, we can't give them that. We can't give them this. We don't want them to rise up. That's where you had laws like loitering. That's where loitering comes from.
Yeah.
You had no job and you were freed off the plantation. But what could you do? Nothing. And so then what pops up? Sharecropping,
Mm-hmm.
which my grandparents on my mom's side literally had to quit school to go and sharecrop. And then we're not talking about great grand. I'm talking about my grandmother who's still currently alive. They had to go and sharecrop. Had to quit school. She had to quit school in 9th grade to go work on another. So basically, they own the land. Oh, so glad. So I'm just glad to be able to share this information because I feel information is power, and this is how we free ourselves. Even if you can't free yourself completely physically or through the bills and stuff that we're dealing with, you can free yourself mentally and know what game is being run on you.
That's right. That's right. And these are things I think, people really need to know and understand. And I think that there was recently, I don't know if people are aware of this, there was recently a reparations rally in DC where there's thousands of people there. And I think more and more people need to be educated on it. I think we're going to try to do a reparations panel with Colin. I know Colin wants to do that at some point to just educate people.
Let me know too. I'd like to be involved.
Yeah, I did mention you too. I said, Marcus would probably like to be a part of that.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, I think, it's the comments that you get from people when they say, well, why should that money just only go to Black people? That's when I know they don't really know the history.
You don't. This is what we have to explain. This nation was built by slavery. Exactly, Eric. A debt owed. It wasn't something given. This country was built off the back of slavery. Literally turned this nation into the hegemony of the world. Literally, slavery delivered trillions of dollars to this nation. Trillions. You wonder where your Charles Schwab's comes from, and your Lehman Brothers, and your Chase Banks, and your Wells Fargo's, and your Bank of America. Where do they come from? They come from slave money.
Yep.
Where insurance comes from? Insurance came from, we're going to, for you to get the slave across to this plantation, or to ship them from, say, the Caribbean into Virginia, just in case your slave dies, how about you pay for insurance for him? This is where these things come from.
Yep. And even in reference to 40 acres, a mule, and a rifle, they don't really want Black people to have arms now.
Nope. Why do you think
changed?
why do you think New York and California have such strong gun control? Because
I remember Ronald Reagan was a part of that with the Black Panthers, because the Black Panthers rose up in California.
Yep.
And Ronald Reagan was like, wait a minute now.
We cannot have these Negroes with all these guns.
That's right. That's right.
Mm-hmm. Well, they were worried about, at that time, you had the Nation of Islam starting to get larger also. And you had the Black Panthers, you had the Gray Panthers also. A lot of people don't know there's a Gray Panthers and White Panthers. And so they all kind of work together. Mm-hmm. But, all of this was going on, and they were seeing, during the 60s especially, they were starting to see a strong pushback from the masses. They were seeing pushbacks from the Black community. They were seeing pushbacks from the Hispanic community, because a lot of people don't know there was a such thing as called Mexico Repatriation Act. And so if you even kind of somewhat looked Mexican to them, no matter if you were a native, no matter if you were whatever, they were just throwing you in Mexico. You could have just been Black and white mixed, or you could have just been a light-skinned Black person. They were just throwing you in Mexico. And a lot of this stuff happened, and it was no recompense or no fixing any of these things. Even, and here's something which a lot of people don't know when they'll talk about, well, the natives got reparations. A couple of the major tribes, the 5 top tribes, they did get reparations to a degree. You'll see certain native casinos and stuff. But what about the couple thousand or so which virtually got nothing? Yeah. A lot of people don't know Native Americans literally, per capita, lead in every negative category.
Yep.
They lead in alcoholism. They lead in poverty rates. They lead in infant mortality rates. They lead in incarceration rates. And it's just because the population is so small, it's not even factored in. And then a lot of people just see that complexion and they say, well, Hispanic, Native American, yeah, whatever. They don't see a difference. But when you start, if you just take black and brown people, which I'm including natives as brown, black and brown people, and you take them off the demographics, the prison population drops down to virtually nothing. I mean, literally, like 80 to 90% of most of the prisons, that's what it's filled with.
Yep. Yep. And not to mention, they tried to take Native Americans' culture and heritage away from them too through the boarding schools.
Yep. What was it? Kill the Indian, save the man.
Yep.
A lot of people don't know also, they took natives, sent them to Spain, sent them to Italy, gave them Catholicism, then brought them back to force it on the people in their why do you think these areas in Latin America are so heavily Catholic?
Yep.
Because the process from the Spaniards was brutal and fortunate. Now, granted, it was still pretty brutal throughout African American slavery too, where it was Protestantism, Lutheranism, Baptists. But you look at Manifest Destiny, whether it was done through Catholicism, Spain, England, any of these European nations, the result was the same. It's just a minor difference in, okay, you're a Catholic, you're a Baptist. You speak Spanish, you speak French, you speak English. But this is what Manifest Destiny and all of this stuff happened. That's the reason why a debt is massively owed. And so, it's a lot once you really start digging into like how severe and massive and widespread. And don't get me wrong, a lot of people just think England, Spain, France, all of Europe had a play in this.
Yes. Thank you for saying that.
If for instance, it was like, okay, well, Great Britain, they might have been the ones who are housing the locations where the slaves are. Then you had over here, you had the Dutch who were sailing the ships. Then you had the Finns who were making the ropes for the ships. Then you had, every single person throughout Europe, it all worked as a coordinated effort from Europe against the Americas and West Africa.
Mm-hmm. And this is why, a lot of us, except for those who actually immigrated from Africa, this is why those of us that are African American, we have like our real like culture. Mm-hmm. We don't have.
Nope.
We don't have it. This is why we don't speak any African languages. That was taken away. Slaves didn't know their birth dates. So that's another thing. That's why it's hard for us to track our ancestry, because they didn't keep record of that.
Mm-hmm.
And just like everything that they had when they came here, they stripped them of that.
That's the reason why the name changing was so important for them.
Yep.
If you strip away a person's name, even if you take the language from them, even if you take a lot of culture from them, if they know what their name is, they can be like, wait a minute, so that name is actually a Swahili name. So I can track back to this village here and start finding out my history. Or maybe it's with the whole Kyrie stuff that's going on, maybe it's a Hebrew name. But you don't get to know that because that history is stripped away for a reason. And I know a lot, and I want to reiterate this over and over and over, especially to Hispanic and Latinos, because a lot of them don't get when you're saying your name is Hernandez or Rivera or any of these names. These are European names still that were placed upon you. More than likely, you might have spoke Aztec, you might have spoke Nahuatl, you might have spoke Bat Creek, you might have spoke a whole bunch of other different dialects and had a very, very massively different name. Dominguez, all this, these are not your names. Jones, Cage, these are not our original names.
Yep. Very well said. Very well said. And I think there was some sort of a movement to try to get back to that, like during the 90s. Remember that? The whole thing, like, let's discover our roots and things like
Mhm.
that. And like,
Yeah.
and people naming their kids those names, like African names, because they're like, no, we need to get closer, like back to that. And I think it's really interesting. I've seen people make comments before, like, why do Black people have weird names? Define weird.
Yeah.
Like what? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's weird to you
Yeah.
because
I mean,
because it's the colonizer. That's
mhm.
is not your name. Because that's the thing. This is why people like Josana would always say you need to decolonize your mind and
Definitely.
ask people to explain to you what is considered. What do you mean by weird? A weird name.
Well, it's weird because to them it's weird because, well, you just came up with this name. So if an Indian guy comes over here and his name is Ranjit, you're not going to tell him his name is weird
That's right.
because you're going to understand that this is part of his culture. And so are you going to really insult people who've had everything stripped away from them if they try to come up with something that they feel is unique that they've created on their own? But we live in a society that there's so much of a bias, and the framework on how we need to perceive things is given to us by somebody else.
Yep.
I mean, the more we start digging and researching, the more we'll start finding out that a lot of things are like, for instance, I can't believe I heard that this is still being taught in schools, the Bering Strait theory.
Yep.
Do you know how many Native American tribes have been pushing back against that? And here's the thing, it's a theory. It's a theory, and it's being taught as if it's a fact. They will admit to you it's a theory. It's a lot of things that we got to think about that we're being taught in schools that are theories. They're not established facts. But yet we're running with them as if they're fact.
Right. And it even goes to, I can speak, you know, as a Black female, even when it comes to things today with like our cultural identity, like our hair, you know, I'm seeing kids on the news being suspended from school because they have braids. I'm seeing women being fired because they have natural hair.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, that's not appropriate. Again, define appropriate.
You're not going to sit there and you're not going to tell somebody who comes to work who's chic about the head wrap that they have on. You're not going to sit there and talk trash about somebody who's a Muslim who decides that they're going to wear a head covering. For the most part, if we have some kind of decent respect for each other. But when we decide, okay, well, part of what I want to do with my identity is maybe I want to grow dreads. Maybe I want to grow a beard, because they don't realize dreads a lot of times is part of the struggle. It's symbolizing something personal and internal to you. And so when we start going against somebody trying to embrace themselves, you're already going to a dark place. And here's something which is once I start doing some research and studying, Black hair just symbolizes that you have melanin in your hair. A lot of people don't realize melanin is not just in your skin. Melanin's in your hair also. When you have a lighter color hair, that's actually lower amount of melanin. So what that does is that gives you less ability. I'm talking about natural. I'm not talking about people who dye their hair different colors. But naturally what it's doing is it's giving you higher protection to deal with the climate. So the coils that, you know, the curly hair, that's to help us deal with the climate, the heat. That's the reason why people who live in those climates who are indigenous to those areas, that's the reason why they have those looks. And that's another reason how you can tell who is moved around, because a lot of times we go off of the mindset that just because a person is in a place, that's where they originate. Perfect example, Egypt. A lot of people don't realize that the Umayyad Caliphate took over all of North Africa and the Middle East, pushing most of the original residents out of that area. In fact, if you think I'm lying, ask an Egyptian if they are Hamitic or, according to the Bible, African. Ask them that question. And you know what they're going to tell you for the most part? That they descend from Ishmael, which means that Their land is a little bit further over, not right there. But if a group of people took all of this land, like I remember a study came out a couple of years ago. Egypt was in the top 5 in skin cancer rates in the world. I won't say a couple. I won't say the. I think Denmark was like number 1, but there's another one that's on there. I'm not gonna say it.
Oh my God. Yeah, when people tell you these things, you guys, like, you have to ask, like, who came up with the definition? Like, who decided what's professional, what's appropriate, what's weird, or what's, unusual? It wasn't us.
Nope. Another one I would tell people to look at is when you say you're an X, go back to the etymology of these words and figure out what they mean. I mean, I can give you a couple of easy ones. Puerto Rico. What does Puerto Rico mean, Sabby? Do you know?
I do not.
It means port of riches. Costa Rica. Coast of riches. This is what the colonizers named these places because this is what it was to them. This is a port of riches. That's a coast of riches. I'll give you another one. Niger. For one, I don't want to get you in trouble on your show. So Niger is actually Greek. In Greek, there's no soft G. So just imagine another G and you get the proper pronunciation. It's not Niger. It's not the Niger River. That word goes to black. So that's called the Black River. Nigeria means the land of black. Ethiopia means burnt face. You think the people who live there named their place Burnt Face? I'm telling you, man, you start looking at what these words really mean and you realize the game that's been played with us.
That's right. Well said. Marcus, thank you so much for coming on and hanging out tonight. Every time you come on, so much education. So much education.
I try my best, and I always hear it's like, oh well, Sabby want me to come on. That's a bet. You already know. Anytime I can do it, I'm definitely gonna try to always come on. It's always so much fun, and your chat is awesome. So much love and shout out to everybody out there, and thank you guys for hearing me out and they're like, oh. This dude, just shut up, Marcus. You talk too much. I know I talk a lot. I'm sorry. My apologies.
Before you go, where can people find you?
Well, you guys can find me at The Political Matrix here on YouTube. And you can find me at The Political Matrix over on Rockfin. As Sabby said before, what I've been thinking, or actually, that's right, I changed it. It's Been Thinking with Young Morpheus. Now, I figure since I'm Young Morpheus, it'll be easier for all these pages to stay together. And then for like my biblical stuff, when I'm breaking down the Bible and some archaeology and history and stuff, Hebrew Apologetics with Young Morpheus and Jose. So, check that out. Any questions you guys have, even if people disagree with me, I have no problem with that. We can all talk it out, have some fun, as long as it's not disrespectful, But, yeah, I'm trying my best to have as many discussions with many people. I'm actually working on a discussion with the Orthodox Jewish. I'm not sure if it's a man or a woman. It's something on Twitter. So I'm working on that. And then I will be live tomorrow night. Of course, me and Chris for The Political Matrix. So you guys are all looking to come through. I need to have you back on sometime soon.
Let me know. Because my schedule is crazy.
Or even if I could just get you for like 30, 45 minutes or so,
Bet. Let's do it.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Marcus. Thank you so much for coming on.
I appreciate you so much. Thank you. And oh yeah, I want to give you props. I've watched your show really grow. I remember when I was last on here, I think you were at like hitting right about 10,000. And to look where you are now and what RBN has been doing as a whole, I mean, hey, good luck, you guys. I mean, I'm glad to see, sorry for anybody take this the wrong way, but, people looking like me making a mark in independent media, it's not a lot of us. And we're not often heard. And so it feels good to see that people are listening to us. And I don't say just take anything I say for granted, like write it down, double check me, hey, Marcus, you screwed up here. Let me know. It's about teaching each other and all learning.
Thanks so much. Thank you so much, Marcus.
All right. You're so welcome.
Bye.
And you have a good evening.
You too.
Bye.
All right, guys. Like I said, Marcus, definitely follow him on YouTube. You will get a wealth of information over there. But I'm just keeping it real. Like, Marcus knows a lot about history, so definitely check him out. I'm going to go to some of the comments. We're going to shout out patrons, and then we're going to get over to the other stories here. You guys had me up pretty late last night on call-in. Pretty late. So Sabby is a little beat, but I'm here and we're going to get through it. We're going to do it. All right. Let's shout out some of the comments here. Angela, societies have no hope in hell of moving forward without paying debts owed. Reparations are debts owed. The longer they are kicked down the road, the longer it will be before anything moves forward. I hear you 100%. Simburska, I hope I said that correctly. White supremacists pit victims against one another. There are many debts, but the Black experience is an extreme emergency of slavery under a new name. Thank you for the super sticker, Tammy. What's up, Nicole? I had to resub to you. WTF. That's YouTube, man. Yeah, guys, those of you watching, make sure you're subbed. Make sure you're subbed. Yeah, that's happened to me on a couple of channels, actually. Thank you for the super chat. Roger, you're on the YouTube chat tonight. You know you got to make this a clip, right? Absolutely. Absolutely. And thank you for this super chat as well. Marcus, are you the new Dr. Ben? Thank you so much for that as well. Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and take these comments on Rockfin as well. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Roger. Sabby, one, thank you for doing this and bringing it home, because who else will tell our story but us? We can't expect anyone to tell this. 2, CRT is not taught in K through 12, but in college, but it is Black history that catches the heat. 3, I was just talking about this last night when David and I spoke about Black women being left to bleed out on hospital tables. And 4, Marcus, let's not forget, it wasn't just Black people dropped off in South America. But after the Civil War, a lot of the former Confederate soldiers fled to South American countries and took their beliefs with them. Where there are whole villages in South America where they celebrate the Confederate flags. This is why you see a heavy racist tint towards Black people when they come to America and how they treat us. That is very interesting there. Very interesting. And thanks for this tip as well. 5, I remember in the 80s when it was all over the news, when it was found out after Al Sharpton did a deep dig of his lineage and found out that Thurmans owned the Sharptons during slavery. Yes, Strom Thurmond is the one of who I speak. Yes. If you've been with me for a while, you guys know I went to college in South Carolina, and the things that you need to know about Strom Thurmond, because he was absolutely appalling. Absolutely appalling. And a lot of people didn't know this until she came out publicly with it, but Strom Thurmond had a Black daughter. She came out publicly about it on the local news in South Carolina. I remember that. I'll never forget. And people were just like, what? John Doe, Sabby Sabs, did you know that Tennessee and Alabama, which are red states, recently abolished prison labor in their states, but California still has prison labor? I did not know that. I knew California still had it, but I didn't know they abolished it, but that's good to know. Thank you for the super sticker, JM. Goth Cactus. Pretty much all heroes of our history books are genocidal maniacs. You can say that again. Peter, thank you for the super chat. Dems keep dangling a carrot for miles, and the GOP doesn't offer any water along the way. What if no one voted at all in the next election? What would happen, right? If no one did that, what would happen? I don't know, right? And thank you for the super sticker, Tammy T. Lady Alex Sabby, it will be good to team up with Red Nation to help give voice to the plight of the indigenous people to this land. Yes, I did have on Decolonize Buffalo twice recently, actually, on RBN. But yes, thank you so much for that. Okay, let's go ahead and give a shout out to patrons really quick. Let's get all patrony. Shout out to everyone who is a Sabby patron. Thank you so much for your support. Oh, hold on, Notori. What is that? I don't know what's going on, Sabby, but YouTube would not let me watch this. It's saying that you're live and it wouldn't open up the screen until now. Yeah, that happens sometimes. I told you guys I told you they're weird. They're weird. Thank you guys for becoming Sabby patrons. If you're interested in being a patron, I have 5 categories: members, Sabbies, Sabsters, Sabinators, and the ultimate. All of you guys are great. You can also see their names scrolling across the bottom of the screen on the ticker there. Thank you so much. Thank you. And I believe I did shout out the newbies last night. I just need to move them further up there. So, what's up? What else are we going to talk about tonight? Let's go ahead and share the thumbnail here. All right. Tonight, we will be discussing Jimmy Dore and Nick Cruz midterm. So Nick was on Jimmy Dore this week, and we're going to dive into that because there's some interesting things that, like Nick said, I want you guys to hear in reference to the midterms and who he feels really won. So we're going to dive into that. We're also going to discuss Chris Hedges' war. That was a very interesting conversation that Chris Hedges had with Lee Camp. We're going to dive into that. And we're also going to discuss Joe Biden. Student loan cancellation is blocked. I am not surprised. And we just discussed the Philly experiment with Marcus Cage. So let's go ahead and dive in, guys. Okay, we're going to talk about this student loan cancellation block. Before we get into this, I do want to remind you guys, we tried to warn you. We really tried to warn people. There were a lot of people that were cheering and really excited when Joe Biden chose to cancel $10,000 to $20,000 K student loan debt for borrowers. And we did warn you that this could happen, that a federal judge could block it. Let's get into the article. I have a couple of clips to show you about this as well, because it wasn't just me, it wasn't just RBN, but Brianna Joy Gray warned you multiple times. So let's go into this here. A federal judge just struck down Biden's student loan forgiveness plan, the most serious legal setback for the debt relief so far. Let's get into it. On Thursday, U.S. District Judge Mark Pittman, appointed by former President Donald Trump in the Northern District of Texas Court, ruled that Biden's plan to forgive up to $20,000 in student debt for federal borrowers making under $125K a year is illegal. See, this is what, I would be more, I think I would be more disappointed if I didn't already kind of anticipate this happening. And I think that's why I'm not as disappointed as some people. A lot of people are very livid today. I've seen it all over social media. People are pissed. But we warned you that this could happen. Let's go back in. This was in response to a lawsuit filed by 2 student loan borrowers, Myra Brown and Alexander Taylor, represented by a conservative group, the Job Creators Network, who sued because they were left out of debt relief. One of them didn't qualify for the full $20K because he didn't receive a Pell Grant. And the other didn't qualify because she had commercially held loans. And this is exactly why I told you guys when it was first announced, do not means tested. Couple of things happen when you do that. When you means test it, first of all, it makes the process more complicated. 2, it drags the process on. It delays it. That means that gives other people time to come in and shut shit down. 3, people who were left out get pissed. They get pissed. And that's what happened here. They were angry. They were pissed. They were left out. I also didn't think it should just be federal student loans because people take out private student loans as well. Some of those people weren't happy that they weren't included. Then there were other things that they added along to it, saying that if your loans weren't consolidated by the time that was announced, then you weren't included either. This is why it should never have been means tested. He should have just canceled all of it in one big swoop and just kept it moving. Let's go on. They claim that issuing broad student loan forgiveness without going through the typical rulemaking process violated the Administrative Procedure Act notice and comment procedure, which requires an elected administrator to justify rulemaking to the public. This ruling is the first of its kind so far amid at least 5 other major conservative lawsuits that are also attempting to block student loan forgiveness. The Education Department will likely appeal this decision. The court has correctly ruled in favor of our motion and deemed the Biden student loan program illegal. The judge criticized Biden administration program, calling it one of the largest exercises of legislative power without congressional authority in the United States history. The ruling protects the rule of law, which requires all Americans to have their voices heard by the federal government. It also comes as the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals already placed a temporary stay on the debt relief until it makes a final decision on its legality. In response to a different lawsuit filed by 6 Republican-led states, which argued debt relief would hurt their state tax revenues. This department has maintained it has the authority to cancel student debt under the HEROES Act of 2003, which gives the Education Secretary the ability to waive or modify student loan balances in connection with a national emergency, like the pandemic. But as Pittman wrote in his ruling, no one can plausibly deny that it is either one of the largest delegations of a legislative power to the executive branch or one of the largest exercises of legislative power without congressional authority in the history of the United States. And having interpreted the HEROES Act, the court holds that it does not provide clear congressional authorization for the program proposed by the secretary. The Justice Department had previously pushed back on the plaintiff's claims, arguing that the HEROES Act doesn't require notice and comment. It goes on to say here, Biden recently said 26 million borrowers have already applied for debt relief. And as of last week, the Education Department had approved 16 million of them to have their loans discharged. It has not yet commented on whether it will extend the student loan payment pause amid these lawsuits, which is currently set to expire December 31st. This is a nightmare. This is an absolute nightmare. They really messed this up. And we warned you that this would happen. And I believe they knew that this would happen. Yet Joe Biden is going on these media tours and he's talking about, well, we didn't have a red wave. Meanwhile, this happened. And you're losing the House. So good luck getting the congressional support. After December 31st, the loans go back into repayment. That needs to be extended immediately. Immediately. This is a problem. Now, the article goes on, but there's something else that I wanted to show you, because if you go to the website, I want to show you what you are going to see. And so, yes, unfortunately, if you are one of those people that did already qualify and you already completed the application, It's not going to happen. So you are being rejected. And I'm going to show you what happens now if you go onto that website. Now, Philip Lewis, he shared this. And I checked it out. This is exactly what you see. If you go to the website now, it says student loan debt relief is blocked. Courts have issued orders blocking our student debt relief program. As a result, at this time, we are not accepting applications. We are seeking to overturn those orders. If you have already applied, we'll hold your application. We will post information as soon as further updates are available. So if you already applied, they're overturning it. They're overturning it. So you're not grandfathered in, just FYI. I had to question the timing because a couple months ago, I told you guys, watch Joe Biden wait until we get closer to the midterms and then decide whether or not he's going to cancel a portion of student loan debt, which is exactly what he did. He did that on purpose to encourage turnout in the midterm. And Gen Z showed up. They really showed up, not as much as they did in 2018 midterms, but they did show up. And I'm pretty sure canceling some of that student loan debt may have had something to do with that, along with the overturn of abortion, right? The midterm elections were this week, Tuesday night. Today is Friday. The same week of the midterms, right after the midterms happen, this is blocked. So I have to question the timing. I really have to question the timing of it. And I will also add, I think this was on purpose, the way that this was done. Why wasn't this blocked before the midterms? Huh? Anybody ask that question? Why wasn't this announced before the midterms on Tuesday? We're not talking weeks later here. We're in the same week. Why wasn't this canceled? Why not? Why? Because they knew it would hurt turnout. So I have to question the timing of this. I really have to question it, that this was released after the midterm elections. So here you have all of these people that came out to vote and support and to help the Democratic Party. They showed up with the numbers. And this is how they're treated. This is an absolute joke. This is also embarrassing as fuck. But I tried to warn you that this could happen. And here we are. So a lot of people are angry. A lot of people are upset. And when I saw a lot of people in indie media reporting about this when it first happened and he said he canceled it, they weren't talking about the implications that could happen with this. I noticed this. Most of them weren't. Some were. Most of them did not. And they got their viewers all excited and yay, ready to go. And they didn't tell them what could happen after. And I think that was a mistake. So people are pissed, and rightfully so. What about the people who only had $15,000 of their student loan debt left? What about the people who only had like $9,000 left? And they were excited. Yeah, this is going to get done. I don't have to deal with this. What about it? It's embarrassing. It really is. And I haven't heard anything from the Biden administration about extending the pause for the payments. So once again, the Democratic Party, and I hate this, but I got to do this. Once again, the Democratic Party, they played you. They played the voters again. This is what I mean with the crumbs. You give them the turnout, then they ghost you. Joe Biden knew that this was a possibility. This is not the first time that this was mentioned. Not at all. In fact, it wasn't just me. It wasn't just RBN that told you this could happen. Breonna Joy Gray told you it could happen. And see, here's the thing. If people would have just I don't know. Watch this episode. And this episode, if I'm not mistaken, I believe this happened 2 months ago. They warned you. They told you what was going to happen. If you did not get a chance to see it, listen to what they say here. Listen to this.
I think the Biden administration could lose this 9-0. And instead of running against the Roberts court, thinking it's a win, I think it'll be an embarrassment that actually frustrates, that alienates the base, because it says you were incompetent. And that's my real concern here is I have to be, this experience of finding this problem has made me a little more cynical about what the goals are here.
Welcome to the club.
Yes. I mean, I wish I could say that I wasn't pessimistic when I wrote this piece, because the subtitle was optimistic. There's time to fix it.
Mm-hmm.
There is time to fix it. But I guess if there's anyone out there who's working in the Department of Education, and you left your job somewhere, you left your job in some other education department in some state, or you left a job in the private sector because you wanted to get things done, but you weren't so worried about getting a couple more purple state Democrats into some districts in 2022. If you want to listen to how to actually get student debt relief done, take one more year, get it done through the Higher Education Act, and you have a shot at it winning.
And to that point, thank you for the super chat, Colin. This is why Biden should have used the Higher Education Act instead of the HEROES as a stronger basis to forgive student loan debt. 100%. Again, this conversation took place 2 months ago. So it just, the material was there. The information was out there. And I'm going to show you another clip too that shows you the information was out there. And it was crazy to me that people were not mentioning this.
To be clear, the Higher Education Act would allow the full scope of the $10,000 to $20,000 and for everybody under 125, like the plan that Biden set out now.
I mean, honestly, there's nothing in it that requires means testing.
Or more. Obviously, I want the whole shebang. So that's another reason to want to pursue that route for those of us who are still holding out for full debt cancellation.
That's right. Brianna, I've got a lot of progressives wrote to me privately or said there were a lot of progressives who were mad that I was saying this. Like I had some secret that, you think that there isn't a conservative lawyer who already saw all this, but they don't want to write it in the Atlantic because they're holding on to it. The conservatives are probably mad that I'm suggesting the Higher Education Act, but progressives said, thank you.
This was the thing too. The feedback that we received when we were talking about it in this way. I can't speak for Bree, but I know when we said this, people, Twitter is such a weird place. People on Twitter are like, you guys are being so pessimistic. Why can't you just give Joe Biden credit for something? Look, you think I wanted this to fail? I have student loan debt, a lot of it. I did not want this to fail. But it was irresponsible for people not to know what was going to happen. And people got mad at me because I was telling you, by the way, federal judge can strike this down. People got mad at me. Would you rather not have that information? You don't want to know? This doesn't make any sense. That is so stupid. And now those same people are really angry today, really upset, really pissed. And I hate to say it, but I told you so. And yet here we are. Here we are. Now, someone just mentioned something I think is really important, where he says Warnock may pay the price for this in the runoff. And it seems like to me, instead of doing this the proper way through the Higher Education Act, it seems like to me, Joe Biden used the HEROES Act because it seems like that was the faster way to get it done. And he was trying to encourage, I can't talk tonight. Sorry. I told you I had a long night last night. He was trying to encourage voter turnout in the midterms. So, okay, let me just do it the faster way instead of taking his time and doing it through the Higher Education Act, and we probably wouldn't be in this situation. But here we are. Here we are. And like I said, Dems are losing the House. So how are they going to get any type of congressional support for this now? So I find it hard to believe. Look, a lot of people right now feel played. They feel used because once again, sold a bag of goods to get us to come out and vote. And then you do this to us. But there's another clip, another one. I just want to show you guys these because I really do feel like I'm trying to tell you the information was there. There was a clip on Rising. Now, Bree shared this as well. She's been sharing a lot of clips today. Just to let people know, I tried to tell you guys. This is a clip here from Rising where she says Biden could have immediately canceled student debt instead of making it a means-tested program, in which case there wouldn't have been those opportunities for people to obstruct. Listen to this piece.
Cost of college
look,
problem.
I agree. You need to fix the cost of college problem. But look what happened to the Democrats who took that line, as opposed to the Democrats that supported Joe Biden's policy. Tim Ryan lost in Ohio. He came out strong against Joe Biden's student debt relief policy, saying that it was unfair to the people of Ohio to cancel debt for this population. And Cortez Masto, who was struggling to make up loss, coming up from behind, said that she disagreed with the White House's blanket forgiveness policy because it does not address the underlying issues with college affordability. She said, quote, "I don't agree with today's executive action because it doesn't address the root problems that make college affordable. We should be focusing on my legislation to expand Pell Grants for lower income students, et cetera, et cetera." Okay, I completely agree that there needs to be a more comprehensive approach here. But instead of saying yes and actually fighting for a more comprehensive approach and saying, if Democrats stay in power, this is what we're going to get, they naysayed, said no, painted themselves as enemies of the kinds of programs that really help a lot of struggling Americans. A huge number of people in her district, 11%, I believe, of her district have student loan. And I bet as she is trailing by such a small margin, she wishes some of those people had come out with her because of her enthusiasm.
But I guess the devil's advocate.
Yeah, because Tim Ryan, for those who are not aware, Tim Ryan lost and he was against the student debt cancellation. So there's that.
The argument is there. I mean, you saw the polling for student debt forgiveness. Yes, maybe she would gain voters among young voters if she supported it, but theoretically could have lost people on the other side of that. I mean, we don't know.
The theoretical voter who was otherwise going to vote for the Democratic Senate candidate, but for their support of student debt cancellation.
I mean, that was the calculation they made, I guess.
And I think that the proof is in the pudding. And, her not, expecting not to come out on top probably in that race, and Tim Ryan's colossal failure tracking with low youth turnout shows that there are consequences. So Democrats and Republicans alike spend a lot of time pandering to homeowners, pandering to, frankly, people who are much more economically affluent, tax cuts that overwhelmingly benefit the rich. At the same time, they ignore working class population, students, and others that have been left behind. And I think this is a real moment for working people to realize that their votes matter and that if they are able to leverage their vote and show that they're willing to turn out when they're actually given policies that benefit them, then they will get stuff in return. The only question now is whether or not Joe Biden will actually follow through on his promise to, in fact, cancel the $10,000 to $20,000 for the poorest Americans that he's promised to cancel.
What do you mean follow through? That's what he's doing.
Well, it's been held up in the courts.
Well, right, but he can't do anything about that.
Well, he could have immediately canceled student debt instead of making it a means-tested program, in which case there wouldn't have been these opportunities for people to obstruct. And that's...
You hear that? There wouldn't have been those opportunities for people to obstruct. Because when you means test it, it takes longer. It lengthens the process. That's why I said this was on purpose for him to means test it in the first place. That's why I was like, why are you means testing it? Just give it to everybody. Just do it. But it delays the process and it gives time for other actors to come in and block it. He did not go about this the right way. He really didn't.
What a lot of the student debt advocates have been saying, that he's basically set it up to give himself an out if he wants to. Now, it looks like there's a...
So that was another clip where they talked about this. They talked about the means testing. They talked about, the danger of that. And here we are. And I'm just sitting back, like I said, question the timing. Okay. For people who are like, oh, you just don't want to give Biden credit for anything. No, like I call it like I see it. Question the timing. He did the cancellation before the end of August. Okay. So enough time before the midterms so people can actually start applying and filling out the application. Enough gap for that. And then right after the midterm elections this Tuesday, this week, the judge blocks it. You can't help but think it was on purpose. You cannot help but think that this was done this way on purpose. And if you think I'm pessimistic, then just think I'm pessimistic. But when you look at the timeline, it is very suspicious. Very suspicious. And I just think of all those people who came out to vote, partially because of that, the younger people, the Gen Z group that showed up heavily. And then this just overturned. Just like that, just blocked. And then people wonder why the majority of Americans don't vote. Because they see these politicians make promises every time, every election cycle. And every time we're told this is the most important election of our lifetime, that same line, we come out, we show up, we vote, and then they screw us over. They didn't even wait 2 weeks to screw us over. The same week. So there's a lot of angry people. There's a lot of frustrated people. I know some people financially are trying to figure out what are they going to do now. They have not extended the pause on the student loan payments. So this is going to be, I don't know what is happening. I don't know what's happening in that administration, but they haven't extended it. And I really think, I know he just did a press conference about the midterm elections, but I think Joe Biden needs to do another press conference and he needs to address the public about this. But you got a lot of people excited. You excited a lot of people. So shout out to those that did the due diligence and told people what could also happen after it. Sun Moon, Biden, here's your crumbs, but give them back. There you go. Lorez, thank you for the super chat. YouTube algorithm unsubs us from channels telling the truth or anti-corp. Happened to me with YouTube channel redacted. Hi, Sabby, Eric fam. Yes, it does happen. I've been unsubbed from channels too. Thank you for the super chat, Colin. Release the memo, right? Release something. I'll take that comment on Rockfin, Eric. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Roger. Time for a ballot initiative that permanently sets minimum wage above local rent rates, where 25% of monthly income made from minimum wage can pay for local rent rates. Example, California can start a $70, yes, you heard me, $70. Have California grant subsidies to small, mid-sized business owners to cover 85% to 100% of labor costs for first timers, and laws outlawing private equity from owning housing. So you'll have money to pay off loans. Gen Z, study abroad. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I was going to get to that point as well. My advice to those of you who are trying to decide if you want to go to college, if you can't afford it, and the only way that you can go is to take out student loans, I have two suggestions for you. One, if you can do so, because not everyone can, study abroad in a college in a country that has free college, like Germany. It's free for Americans too. Or go to community college. And I know it's not sexy or whatever, but go to community college for the first 2 years. Then maybe transfer to a 4-year university so you don't end up with so much debt. Or 3, I'll add a third one, go to trade school. That's my advice for you. But you don't want to, I'm telling you from experience, you don't want to end up like me. You don't want to have all this mound of student loan debt because it's a burden and it really sucks. It really sucks. That's my advice to you guys. Try not to take out those loans. Thank you for the super chat, Roger. On purpose, remember who authored bankruptcy law. That's right. That's why he needs to be the one to make it right. That's why he should have just canceled all of it. This is all on him. Well. But yet, here we are. We're going to go on to our next story here. So if you didn't get a chance to see, Nick was actually on Jimmy Dore show this week, and they were talking about the midterm elections. And we're going to cover a little bit of this conversation here because there were some things here that were said that I 100% agree with. And we need to start asking ourselves, who really won Tuesday night? Let's get into that.
So I want to talk about this because there's the big election last night, and people were saying that it saved democracy. I just want to remind people that the U.S. is an oligarchy. It is not a democracy. So if you think you voted last night for corporate Democrats who just gave $85 billion to Nazis in Ukraine, and you call that saving democracy, I have to disabuse you of that stupid idea because you don't live in a democracy. Your democracy was stolen from you decades ago.
Jimmy, you know when I really figured it out was when Aaron Mate was here and we watched a clip of the debate between Fetterman and Dr. Oz, and they asked them about minimum wage.
And they both don't want it.
I think John Fetterman said goodnight, and I think Dr. Oz said we're going to start fracking, and somehow that... And I was like, if he was a real doctor, he should have dropped everything to help John Fetterman.
Right then.
Yeah, that's probably why he lost. People are like, you're not a doctor.
If you were a doctor, you'd be helping that stroke victim instead of running against him and
frack that lump on the back of his neck and see
trying to confuse him in public.
Yeah.
So if you voted yesterday, this was your choice. You got to vote for the oligarchy or the oligarchy.
Let's pause here. This is correct. Because, and maybe that's the way we should phrase it to people going forward. Instead of saying, are you going to vote Democrat or Republican? Maybe we should just start telling people, are you going to vote for the oligarchy or the oligarchy? And see how that resonates with people so people really understand what they're actually voting for. Because both are corporate. Both are owned by Wall Street. Maybe we should change our framing.
That's why it was a tough election.
Yeah. Well, I thought I'd do Michael Moore a favor and vote for the oligarchy.
That's right. As a personal favor to Michael Moore. So you got guys like this. This guy, of course, he's in bed with the establishment oligarchy, and he says fascism took a big step backwards last night. Thank you, America. Again.
Oh, really? Does it make up for Elon buying Twitter even?
Again, if fascism is what Mussolini said it was, which is the convergence of the state and corporations to work against the citizen, which is what it is, both parties are 100% fascist. We live in a fascist oligarchy. You don't. So, and here's both.
Also, to Jink's point, when he said fascism took a big step back last night, how did it take a big step back if the Democrats are losing the House? People were literally out there. If you guys watch Twitter, people are like literally out there cheering rah rah Democrats because there wasn't a red wave and they're losing the House. That's how desperate people are. Isn't that sad? That's embarrassing. The Democratic Party should have wiped the floor. They should have wiped the floor with the Republican Party. They couldn't even do it. They couldn't do it. They're sitting back saying, I sincerely hope we don't have a red wave. Yay! AOC included on Twitter. See, there was no red wave. Boo, you just lost the House. You do realize none of your shit's getting through, right? You realize your legislation is not getting through. What are you cheering for? Ay.
Parties side with the corporation over voters and workers. Wall Street won another election. The only difference between Democrats and Republicans is the speed at which their knee hits the floor when a donor enters the room, as Ralph Nader said. And so I had to remind him. Now here is Michael Moore. Michael Moore,
God.
we critiqued him yesterday. He was just flat out lying to people to get them to vote. And people who were non-voters, his message to non-voters was, please vote as a personal favor to me. He didn't have anything that he could entice them with as policy or, hey, if you vote, this good thing will happen for you. It was just do it as a favor to me because there is no reason to vote.
How surprised are you that they did it? I didn't think he had that many people who do a favor for him.
He says, yesterday we created a blue wall that stopped a red wave. Few were willing to predict that millions of you made it happen, and our democracy lives to see another day. Thank you. So what I said was you created a blue wall of corporate oppression disguised as one big democracy virtue signal as you stand for 100% corporate controlled pro-war anti-worker party that is sending $80 billion to Ukraine while denying us healthcare and a living wage. Hooray!
Yeah, but Republicans are worse, sir.
Worse. So let me bring in Nick Cruz. Nick, what do you have to say about yesterday's results?
And still undefeated in these elections, Goldman Sachs.
Still undefeated.
And still undefeated in this election. Israel is 100% undefeated. There are progressives, quote unquote, that are celebrating the win of John Fetterman. There wasn't a blue wall. There was a Zionist wall.
Let's comment on what Nick just said there. Undefeated Goldman Sachs. Undefeated the state of Israel. Because Goldman Sachs, in the end, they still win. The state of Israel, and I mean the state, not the people, Zionism still wins. So what exactly was one? Do you see what I'm saying? This is why the other night, when I talked about this, I said the real winners, besides Wall Street, the military industrial complex, besides them, in reference to the people that actually won, the real winners were the ballot initiatives that passed in people's favor. And that happened in the States. Those were the real winners. And I got something to say about that later on tonight in a second. But those were the real winners for the people. You didn't win anything by voting for a Democrat politician or Republican politician. You didn't win anything. Do you get that? If you're working class, if you're poor, you won nothing. If you're not in one of those states that had those ballot measures that passed in favor of the people, you didn't win anything. I want to be very clear about that. Let's go back in.
The progressive movement cannot win without selling out to Zionism in the military industrial complex. So they are 100% the winners. And despite what the narrative that come from the Republican Party, I want you guys to know Rand Paul is the only Republican senator that voted against Ukraine aid.
I know.
So another win for Zelensky. So thus far, working class, they took another loss. Zelensky is smiling, Israel is smiling, Goldman Sachs is smiling. So isn't this a grand democracy?
Yeah.
You hear that? Once again, the working class still lost. And I can say this time and time again, and people believe that their lives are actually going to improve by voting D or R. And then you still look around and you realize you're still struggling. You know, you're still working paycheck to paycheck, right? And if you lose a paycheck, you're screwed. You look around and you see you still can maybe barely afford gas. You go to the grocery store and you see the prices are still expensive, so you're still trying to ration your groceries. So if you're working class or you're poor, what have these parties done since my lifetime? And I mean my lifetime, okay? I'm not talking about the shit that they passed before my black ass was born. I'm not talking about Social Security. I'm not talking about the New Deal. I'm talking about since I was born. What have these parties actually done for working class and poor people that has improved your life? Maybe a couple social issues, but those were passed at the Supreme Court. So if people say, well, gay marriage passed, that was the Supreme Court. What have they done?
Oh, well, it's quite a democracy. As Ryan Knight reminds us, he says big business and the billionaire class win yet another election in the United States and retain full control of the House, Senate, and both corrupt parties who do their bidding. That's very well said. He said, just a reminder that the U.S. elections are not about preserving democracy. They're about preserving the illusion of democracy and keeping the people trapped in a corrupt political system that puts corporations over people.
That's right. And Ryan, by the way, if you don't follow Ryan Knight on Twitter, definitely follow him. He's spot on. And this is true, because if we actually had a true democracy with third-party candidates have to fight to get on the ballot, Would independent candidates have to fight to get on the back? Would Matthew Ho have to try to win a lawsuit because the Democratic Party decides, yeah, we decide we don't want you on the ballot? Would you have to go through all that? No, you wouldn't. No, you wouldn't.
That's what election day is in America. It's nothing to be celebrated. There should be no celebration today whatsoever. No matter what happens on Tuesday, over 500,000 Americans will not have a place to live. Millions won't have access to adequate health care, and over 37 million Americans will still be living in poverty.
I saw this tweet when it posted on Twitter. This one was spot on. That's why I say, like, if you're working class or poor, you didn't really win anything. The poverty issue is still a problem. The homeless issue is still a problem. People are still living paycheck to paycheck. We don't even have a $15 minimum wage federally in this country. Now, some of the states have it, but federally, $7.25 an hour. But you're supposed to go stand in line, take off from work, and vote for these same clowns who go in and do nothing for you?
People like to, so now it's very popular now to say that homeless people the problem is just drug addicts and stupid lefties with their policies that allow drug addicts to camp on. And if they would just get rid of these stupid lefty policies, homeless people would vanish.
That's, by the way, that's just the part that you see a lot, which is huge.
That's right.
But the other huge part that you don't know about, they have jobs. That's right. 40% of homeless people have jobs. Okay, just so you know. And what I think 20% of
and that includes those people are usually ones that were evicted. So they already had a job before they were homeless. And they fell on hard times, whatever it may be, just an unexpected expense. It can happen to any one of us. It just so happens that some of us have more money to handle those unexpected circumstances. And you'll see them. You'll see them here in Boston. You'll see them in LA. You'll see them in people who had something happen financially and they couldn't pay their rent and they didn't have family that they could go stay with, or some may still have family. But what you have to understand this, and I have to put this in here, what you have to understand is that some people do not have a family support system. So they may have family members, but that doesn't mean the family members are supportive of them. So just because so-and-so's mom and dad have a house down in Florida, so-and-so's mom and dad may not let them come stay at that house. You see what I'm saying? Like, some people have that type of relationship with their family where the family members look at it as though you're down and out, it's your fault. Pull yourself up by the bootstraps, may have that type of mentality. And I know this because I've seen this in person. I've known people who have been in that type of situation where they fell down on their luck, had a financial situation, and they had family members that had homes and cars, but the family members would not let them come back. Not everybody has that. And I think that's important for people to understand. Not everyone's parents are alive. That's another thing. Not everybody has a family member that has a place for them to stay. They may have an apartment, but they may have no room to keep them there. So it really upsets me when people criminalize homeless people or when people try to demonize them, because you don't always know. You may think you know. You don't always know what happened to them that put them in that situation to begin with. I want to get to the part here again where Nick comes in. There we go.
I know they say 1 out of 5 kids live in poverty, but I cannot stress enough that the poverty rates in this country is a joke. So according to this country, if you're a single mom with 2 kids and you make $23,000 a year, you're technically out of poverty.
Yeah.
And that's a joke. And 1 out of 5 kids live in poverty despite the culture of low expectations set by capitalists. So imagine what the child poverty rate would be if they actually use real common sense numbers. No one, no matter where they are in this country, can live as a single mom with 2 kids on $23,000 a year. If you have 4 kids, $32,000 a year. These are ridiculous numbers, and the child poverty.
And I just want to add in here really quick, and I'll let Nick finish. It's hard to live as a single person with no kids making $23,000 a year. As I can tell you, you're trying to live off of that in Massachusetts, you're going to be strong. Even in South Carolina, like, it's hard. That's your money will be tight. Okay. Your money will be very tight. So the poverty rate that they're discussing here, like, it's actually ridiculous. You expect someone who has 2 kids to be able to live off of that?
Rate is still high.
Correct.
Now, do you think all these mandates and lockdowns and stuff to fight fascism maybe count as like a homeopathic remedy?
So, I mean, I can't get over how the Democrats are on social media today claiming victory. It's mind-blowing to me that that's just, you guys did it with, just the left fist of the corporate fucking bully won yesterday. That's what happened. Control of the U.S. Senate may again be decided in Georgia as the race between Democratic incumbent Raphael Warnock and Republican Herschel Walker heads to a December. That's how corrupt the Democrats are. They can't even beat Herschel Walker. That's how corrupt. That's how corrupt Hillary Clinton was. She couldn't even beat a game show host. This is how corrupt the Democrats are, and they have to try to lie to you and trick you into thinking that somehow because they're not going to stand up for you economically, but they're not going to stand up for your freedom of speech or your liberty or your Fourth Amendment or your First Amendment, but they will protect democracy in some vague, nebulous way that they can never tell me how they're going to do it.
And this was the point that I was trying to make as well, was that this race should have never even gone to a runoff. Like, this is ridiculous. Like, he should have tried to find the best way to win that outright. Because now, like someone mentioned, and I think it was Wary mentioned it earlier, with them blocking the student loan cancellation, will that affect the turnout for Warnock in December when they have the runoff? I mean, you should have tried your best to win that outright. But the fact that they had to struggle with that just is terrible. Let's bring Nick in here as well.
The parliamentarian that I never heard of.
They'll find another parliamentarian.
Not give you what they're supposed to.
They'll blame it on Joe Rogan.
Oh, the Council of Owls met and said we can't give Medicaid.
Don't forget Susan Sarandon. They'll blame her too.
Yeah, and Jimmy and my brother Rome, he's playing on RBN. He said the best outcome for the working class, and not the reason why you would think, is for the Democrats to win, so people can see the Democrats in full control and see the Democrats not do anything for them. What are your thoughts on that, Jimmy?
I 100% agree with that. I was like, I hope that the Democrats win again, so they can't have a scapegoat to blame our lost democracy on. And when people go to vote in 2 years, they'll remember the Democrats have been in complete control of government for 4 years, and my life got worse.
So that's a good point, and that's something I really didn't think about. But maybe it is a good thing for people to see that. So then people can realize, you know what? Economically, I'm doing worse now than I was under GOP. So I see it wasn't just having a Republican president. We have a Democrat president. And the same things economically are still happening. So maybe people do need to see that.
That's why people voted for Donald Trump, not because they were all of a sudden half the country turned into racists, not because half the country turned into Nazis or white supremacists, but because they voted for Barack Obama twice and their lives got worse. That's why the black and brown people in Wisconsin and Milwaukee wouldn't show up to vote for Hillary Clinton, and they let a guy like Donald Trump win because they voted for Barack Obama, and their lives got worse. Just like, so that I agree with you. I think it actually would be better off for the country if the Democrats remained in control of government, so people could see that there is no difference in the parties except around the edges. Now, there was a difference in the parties around the edges, certainly when it came to COVID. DeSantis actually approached COVID in a sane way, where he did follow the science as opposed to the Democrats who pretended to follow the science. What they were following was anything Big Pharma told them. And that's exactly what the Democratic Party did. Now, they're both beholden to Big Pharma, but they're, again, just around the edges and around free speech. Now, somehow free speech has become a right-wing cause where it used to be like people say free. So now they've equated free speech with hate speech. So if you're for free speech, they then say you're for hate speech, which is not, again, that's a sleight of hand. And that's not true because that's all they have to run on. They have to run on, well, we're going to talk about it in another thing about how the Democrats, they didn't run on the economy. They didn't run on a minimum wage. They didn't run on health care. What they ran on was abortion because
they couldn't. So this is the thing. They couldn't run on it. They really couldn't. They couldn't run on the minimum wage thing because it was 7 Democrats that voted against the $15 minimum wage in the Senate. So they couldn't brag on that. Now, if it would have passed, they would have been like, they could have said, hey, look what we did. We increased the minimum wage to $15 an hour federally. They couldn't say that. They could try to brag about the child tax credit, but could they? Because they cut it short, right? They couldn't brag about those stimulus checks, the $2,000 stimulus checks, because they didn't give us $2,000, right? This thing is flying around and it is annoying me. Go away. Anyway, they couldn't brag about that. That was the thing. Economically, they didn't really have anything that they could brag about. So then what they do, we got to go pivot towards the social issues. We got to tell people that their lives are at stake here, right? So I think had it not been, we got to think about this for a second. If the Supreme Court did not overturn Roe v. Wade, would we have seen that red wave? Let's think about it, guys. Let's pretend none of this happened. Let's pretend this press about the student loan cancellation being blocked. Let's pretend that happened before the midterm election instead of after. Let's pretend the Supreme Court did not overturn Roe v. Wade. Would we have seen a red wave then? Probably so. The overturn of Roe v. Wade, honestly, that was probably the best thing they had in their pocket for the Democratic Party. Was that, even though people said economic issues was number one, that was probably the best thing they had in their pocket, and canceling the student loan debt. But if the press about the student loan cancellation being blocked came out before the midterms, I don't think the turnout would have been the same. Hit that like button, guys. That helps me with the algorithm.
That's the only thing they had left to run on. And saving democracy. Go ahead.
Yeah, you brought up Ron DeSantis. Me and my co-host CJ on Revolutionary Blackout, we did a stream covering how neoliberalism enables fascism.
Yes.
So you had Ron DeSantis that pretty much have a stronghold in Florida. You got the right that's begging him to run in 2024. And I personally think he'll do better than Trump at this point because the Democratic Party and liberals created a powerhouse out of Ron DeSantis because of the void they left because they were so horrific on the COVID policies. If they didn't leave that opening for Ron DeSantis, he doesn't exist. And that just another example of how neoliberalism for the Democratic Party enables the far right.
And he's right. And this is what I'm telling people, that people are worried about Donald Trump, and some of them are sleeping on Ron DeSantis. Ron DeSantis is popular, especially considering how he handled Florida, and even friends of mine that live there that are not Republican and are not what you call a fan of Ron DeSantis. Even they said the way he handled the pandemic said a lot. And so that's the person I feel more people need to be paying closer attention to. If he ran in 2024 or 2028, he could win. And if people thought that Trump's policies were crazy, what do you think Ron DeSantis is going to do?
100%. Somebody just made this point that it's the Democrats neoliberal. Oh, it was the Hulk. What's his name? Mark Ruffalo. He tweeted that out. The Democrats are enabling fascism. So he did a video about it, and he got in big trouble. So he had to run around and do campaign stops for Democrats, saying that they were protecting democracy because he got caught telling the truth about the Democratic Party, and he wants to remain in his perch high above liberal Hollywood.
Yeah, Mark Ruffalo, if you follow him on Twitter, he pulls things back sometimes. Like he criticized the Democratic Party, and of course the liberals came after him, and so he had to pull it back. He had to walk it back. See how that works?
That's exactly why Mark Ruffalo. So here's Jen Psaki, former press secretary, now getting her corporate.
So Jen Psaki says no races have been called yet, and they won't be for a while. But just some facts for your back pocket. Bill Clinton lost 54 House seats in 1994, and Barack Obama lost 63 in 2010, and both went on to win re-election. Yeah, the country was at a different place economically back then, too. That's something to keep in mind. The other thing is in 1994, we did not have social media. And let's be clear, social media does have an effect. We did not have social media. 2010, some people still weren't even on Facebook yet. You know, more people are able to see through the Democrats' BS now. So I'm going to get to this part here, because I think there was one more part where, or maybe not. I thought there was one more part where, oh, Nick came in right here.
Fetterman is the opposite of, he never had a job in his fucking life.
Really?
He's not a worker.
Oh, the stroke.
His hands are softer than a baby's ass. Are you shitting me?
I don't know
Fetterman.
I just know he looks like the Thing. From
That guy's a fake. He's 100,000% fake.
I shall see where he went to college, but I think he went to elite academia as well.
I think
Very wealthy. Yeah, Harvard.
Did he go to University? Did he go to Wharton? Where'd he go?
I see Harvard University.
There you go.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
And then
this guy is not a worker.
The only job he ever had was as a politician. He never fucking did anything.
Oh my God, he looks like he had.
Eric called him Fakerman. Yeah, that's another thing. And then they're talking about Fetterman. So I think Nick, you know, he did a good job. He's been on there before. Nick was just doing the damn thing. So well said. That message needs to get out there. And people need to hear more of it from more people. He went to the Kennedy School, of course. A lot of them went to the Kennedy School at Harvard. A lot of them come out of there. Let's be real. Okay. Going to go to some of the comments here, and we're going to get to our next story. Film, TV, and life. Have you read Bill Mitchell's Reclaiming the State, Sabby? I have not, but you were like the third person that told me I need to check that out. I got to add that to my list of books I need to read. You guys are always giving me great recommendations in reference to literature. Israel Moore. Sabby Sabs, the tribalism is so annoying. People are dying, and that's why celebrity, beauty, pageant culture, and politics is disgusting. I agree. Thank you for the super chat, Colin. The squad is happy because it's easy for them to virtue signal to the poors now. Yep. That's right. 2008 BS. Sabby, also remember the Dems seem to have a blackout on discussing all that crazy stuff going on with Mississippi. It's water and the welfare funds. Yeah, that too. They've been really silent about that. Thank you for the super chat, Miss. The student loan forgiveness was a scam to get young people to vote for them. That's right. That's right. Now, I don't know if that's going to be resolved or not, but if it's not, like I said, I don't know. If they don't fix it, I told you guys hit the streets before, but like if they don't fix that, like, oh dear. Roman, Sabrina is cooler than penguin feet. Have you ever seen that movie called Happy Feet? I love that movie. It's so cute and adorable. Well, thank you. Penguins. All right, we're going to get to our last story here, and this is Chris Hedges and Lee Camp. Now, they discussed a number of topics during this interview, but the one I wanted to focus on is what Chris Hedges says about war. I think this is important. If you guys don't know, Chris Hedges, obviously, he's covered multiple wars. Like as a journalist, he's been there, like on the ground. And so I'm pretty sure he's seen some disturbing things, like just to be honest with you here. But he's going to talk a little bit about that. And I want you to pay attention to some of the things that he says here. I thought this was a really good discussion. And this is actually on Mint Press News. I'm not sure if it's on Lee Camp's channel or not, but I saw it on Mint Press News.
you really didn't get a sense. I mean, this has been true in every conflict I've ever covered. I mean, for instance, I went into Kuwait with 1st Battalion, 1st Marines, and the Iraqis who had been cut off from their water for several days were desperate to get water, and they would walk out into the minefields and they'd blow their legs off. You can survive several hours, unfortunately, with your legs blown off, screaming for help. I mean, in real time, we could have set up a satellite feed to show you that, but that's never going to happen. So we don't see war, and the media does a pretty good job of feeding, which they're doing in Ukraine, the mythic narrative of war. It's become a battle of light against dark, a good against evil.
I just want to chime in here in reference to what he said about the casualties, like the physical casualties that happen at war. If I remember correctly, the last time that was actually shown where you saw like women and children being like, blown up, gotta be careful what I say on here, but like blown up or blown to pieces or things like that was the Vietnam War. I think that was the last time they let mainstream media cameras cover that type of content. And since the Vietnam War, they didn't let you come back in and do that. And that's why it's important to have like the investigative journalists that are on the ground, like someone like a Chris Hedges or someone like a Vanessa Beeley, to cover the things that the cameras won't let you come in and get anymore. So they're able to cover it as independent journalists and give that information back to us. But it's really important that people understand that after the Vietnam War, even when mainstream media and CNN, when they go over there, notice they don't cover the casualties. They don't put that on video anymore. And I think part of that was done because of, well, censorship. Some people may have felt it was too graphic for people to see, but also it sends a message about the reality of war and what actually happens to the civilians. So there's that part too.
Putin is the new Hitler. Doesn't cover conflict a long time. Both sides lie like they breathe, and war is a very dirty business. So I was glad I put it out just to remind people of what war actually is, and of course the cynicism of the war in Ukraine, where we're going to destroy the country and make every Ukrainian, or hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Ukrainians bleed to death. For what? Mm-hmm. I mean, they're going to have to negotiate in the end. But it's not about Ukraine. It's not about democracy. It's not about freedom. It's about degrading Russia. I mean, that's
a good point there that he added. Joe Biden has said so himself. Well, they'll be fighting until the last Ukrainian is standing. For what? Like when he says that, does anyone like pick up on that? Like, for what? What's the point if everybody's dead? What do you win if everybody look around and everyone's dead? What do you get? Do you get any territory? Do you get extra land? Like, what exactly do you get if you're dead? So then you have to ask yourself this question. If you start with that, you have to follow up with this question. Then what's the point of it? What is it all for? Why are you still going if you know you're going to have to negotiate at some point anyway? Then you have to remember that war is a profitable industry. There's a lot of money to be made with war. Companies like Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, Raytheon, the weapons manufacturers, they make a lot of money from war. If we don't have war, some of those companies would probably have some massive layoffs, even though Raytheon does layoffs anyway. But think about it. Would they exist? Would those companies exist? Something to marinate on there a little bit.
Actually, if you look closely, they're even upfront about it. So I was glad I put the book out. Just to remind people of the enterprise of death that war is, and what it does to human beings, what it does to families, what it does to societies. and the price that and never-ending price for many that you have to pay when you go to war.
That's right.
Yeah, the cheerleading for what seems to be endless or ongoing war in Ukraine is kind of amazing. I know the word Orwellian is thrown around a lot these days, but it feels very Orwellian to me to watch so many liberals across America, wave Ukrainian flags and act like they stand for Ukraine, when really what the politicians who want them to hold those flags and the point at the core of that is, let's keep this thing going and keep just funding and arming people. And, the US and UK through Boris Johnson helped end any peace talks back in April. So it really is. We're at a place where now peace, standing for peace equals war, or standing for war equals peace.
Well, this isn't any different than the Bush's call to invade Iraq. I mean, I'd come into the newsroom at the New York Times and the message bank on my phone would be full of death threats, and the only reason there weren't more is because they ran out of room. And nationalism is a disease. I saw it. I saw the poison of it around the world, and it's the flip side of nationalism is always bigotry and racism, but it's also self-exaltation. I mean, all of this so much, especially after the humiliating defeat in Afghanistan and the debacles in Iraq and Syria and Libya. It's a way for us to resurrect our purity, our moral superiority, our goodness. This has nothing to do really with Ukraine. Most Americans couldn't find Ukraine on a map. It is about the celebration of us as a virtuous, a good people and a powerful people. And that is a real sickness. It's a sickness that I saw with the wars in the Middle East, and it's the same sickness that we're seeing now. It's also historically, it's a way to willfully ignore our own provocations to Russia. I was in Eastern Europe in 1989. I covered the revolutions in East Germany, Czechoslovakia, Romania. I was acutely aware of the promises made to Moscow not to expand NATO beyond the borders of a unified Germany.
And let's just go back here for a second, because that's really what a lot of this comes down to. Expanding NATO, which was not supposed to happen. Okay, this isn't like an opinion or anything like that. Like, that was not supposed to happen after the fall of the Berlin Wall. And it happened anyway. So that's what a lot of this goes back to, this tension, the war that we're seeing right now. The expansion of NATO brought us to this point.
Not to station NATO troops. We now have 100,000 NATO troops or something in Eastern and Central Europe. And that was really done not for security reasons, because Gorbachev wanted to build a security and economic alliance with Europe and the United States, as did Yeltsin, and people forget, as did Putin in the early years. It was about the belief in this arrogant, hubristic, unipolar world, i.e. after the Cold War, the United States, would dominate the globe. And of course, Russia was weakened and crippled and no longer seemed to be a factor that the military establishment had to take into account. And it was also about billions in arms profits, because you have to reconfigure these Soviet bloc armies with NATO-compatible equipment. So it's billions and billions and billions in arms sales. So those were the two reasons. It was not in our security interest. I fully believe that Russia would not have, I'm not excusing it, by the way, preemptive war, which this is a criminal war of aggression. But I fully believe that Russia would not have invaded Ukraine if we had not expanded NATO. And I think
that's right. And so people who will come to you and say, who invaded who? They leave that piece out. It's something I've noticed, like they leave that piece out, right? So you can't be like, I'm sorry, like I'm not trying to roll with the whole like pro-NATO narrative, like people supporting that. The squad supports that, by the way. The progressives in Congress support that.
Especially given Russia's history, it was invaded through Ukraine twice in the last century, first in World War I, second in World War II, the century before that, of course, by Napoleon. There is historical trauma legitimate historical trauma. And I think they have every right to ask that Ukraine remain a neutral country. I don't think that's an unreasonable request. Even the New York Times has said that the idea that we're going to recapture all of Ukrainian territory, including among the ethnically Russian sections of Ukraine, is folly. These are the New York Times words, not mine. But the war industry, which just leaps from debacle to debacle to debacle, is never held accountable. The pimps of war, the Robert Kagans and Elliot Abrams and Victoria Nuland's, it doesn't matter. I mean, Victoria Nuland was Cheney's foreign policy advisor. Now she was in the Obama White House. She's in the Biden White House.
And we all know that Dick Cheney was very, very much pro-war. Another warmonger. But the point that Chris Hedges is saying here is that it doesn't matter which party she was under at the time. It doesn't matter which administration she was under at the time. The goal is still the same. So she can work for Dick Cheney and then she can go work for Barack Obama. It doesn't matter. The goal is still the same because both parties are pro-war. That's how someone like Victoria Nuland can do that. And I wish more people paid attention to that. Right? Because if both parties weren't pro-war, then why would she go to work for Barack Obama? She's able to do that because he was pro-war also.
These people are just utterly protean, and they're never held to account because they're funded by the war industry. Their think tanks are funded by the war industry. That's why they always have a media platform. I dealt with Abrams and Robert Kagan when I covered the war in El Salvador. They were out working out of the State Department under the Reagan administration, and their primary job was to attempt to discredit everything we were reporting off the ground. That was their job, and they you can't get rid of them. I mean, they're like some anti-virus bacterial strain that never goes away. I mean, the whole lead up to the war in Iraq, I had to listen to these people who knew nothing about the Middle East. I'd been the Middle East bureau chief for the New York Times. I speak Arabic. I'd spent months of my life in Iraq. I certainly know the instrument of war, but if you didn't parrot back that dominant narrative, you were shut out. Didn't matter how.
And that's still happening today. If you don't have that mainstream narrative about war, conflict that's going on abroad, you will be censored. You will be shut out. They would try to make it so that no one can find you or follow you, right? So that they don't hear that narrative. And I think it's important for people to hear both perspectives. You need to be able to pull the bullshit out of mainstream media and fill it with some of the information that comes from independent media. People need to you got to let the American people do their own thinking. And from what I've seen, it appears a lot of these platforms don't want American people to do that. Like they're like, oh, that's not the right information. Oh, that's not the mainstream narrative. So we're going to censor it so that people can't see it. Let the American people think for themselves. But hiding the information and preventing them from seeing it, that's bullshit.
How much expertise you have. So the very people they present as quote unquote experts come out of the war industry or the intelligence community. And of course, they're highly paid for this. They're all sitting on the board.
I think it starts to
vested in because of the increased money they make.
Yeah, you have an excellent chapter.
That's right. You can see the rest, the full interview, because like I said, they don't just talk about war. They talk about other topics too, like Joe Biden and the midterms and things like that. You can see it on, I'm sorry, I'm trying to show this. Yeah, so it's called Chris Hedges. That's weird. It moved on my screen, but not on. Okay, there we go. It's called Chris Hedges and Lee Camp. War is the greatest evil. Thank you so much for that, Eric. Eric has put that link there in the chat. So you can watch the entire interview because I think it's a little bit over an hour if you want to see the full interview, but definitely check that out. Really good stuff there. Now, I think, something that's really important that we just got to say here in reference to this type of information, it's important that we have sites like Substack, right? So that Chris Hedges has a place where he can write. Because Substack, for the most part, they don't care. I mean, Substack, you can put a lot of things up on Substack. For the most part, I haven't seen them go after people that way. So it's important that you have that. It's important that you have other platforms besides YouTube, that you have a Rockfin, that you have a Rumble, that you have an Odyssey, so that people can talk about those issues. Some of the best content that I have seen in reference to war is on Rockfin, believe it or not. So there are shows on there that are only on there and are not on YouTube for that reason, because of the censorship. So I definitely, if you're not on Rockfin, definitely check out Rockfin if you want to hear a different perspective in reference to war. Definitely check that out. But great conversation there. Definite shout out. Thank you for the super chat, Lorez. Careful, Sab, with the NATO truth. That sounds pro-ru. That sounds pro-ru. I think that's what that says. Thanks for that. And Nicole says, I love to listen to both Lee and Chris. Same here. Yeah. I have to bring Lee Camp back on. It's been a minute, but I love his show, Moment of Clarity. I love that show. One more thing I do want to address before I skedoodle. You guys know I told you all about the ballot initiatives. We went over a lot of that stuff. Roger Meadows and I think we're going to try to do a deeper dive to tell you about all the ones that pass in these states. And also Roger sent over a document to me to tell you how to try to make your state a ballot initiative state. So we will do more info on that, but I do need to make you aware of something. I did tweet out yesterday about single payer passing in 20 districts in Massachusetts. Now, when I put that tweet out there, I just posted up really quickly because I had already discussed how it would work. I had already explained to people it was a non-binding initiative. If you had been watching me for the past 5 days, I went through every single ballot initiative that we had in Massachusetts. And I explained to people that even with that one, you would still have to reach out to the state legislatures and ask them to make it a law. So it was not a done deal. So because I had already done all that, when I posted it on Twitter, I just posted it, shared the site and everything. I got a lot of people came after me as if I was an organizer. And I want to be very clear. I never organized this. All I did was share the information. That's it. The information that's on Mass Care's site and the information that came from the article. We walked through this. We went over this. In fact, I'll show you here for people who may not remember. This was the video, Medicare for All in Massachusetts. If you watch that clip, you'll see me go through the whole thing and explain to people what would need to be done after that. I also told you that Mass Care will be here next week to also talk about this in this initiative. I also explained to you in that video, it's not even for the entire state. I explained to people it was a non-binding initiative. Why am I bringing this up? So many people came after me on a personal level, and I'm not going to say their names on here, but they cannot expect to get any help from me ever. We're done. Some people came after me on a personal level for sharing the fucking information. So for people who do not understand, that is my job. I share information. And if you don't agree with the strategy that is being done, that is your right. I don't really care. But here's what's not going to happen. When you get to the point where you are making personal attacks towards people because you disagree with the strategy, that's where I draw the line. And this has been going on for a while. And I know some people don't agree with the state-by-state strategy. That's fine. Again, I am not the organizer here. I didn't organize this. But to start coming after people for personal attacks, that's a no for me. That's a no. So because people were confused, I deleted the tweet because people were like, I don't understand. Well, wait a minute. What is this? Or actually is this, or actually is that. And I was like, fuck it. I'm just going to delete the tweet announcing it because people were so confused. Those of you that saw the episode weren't confused because I had explained all that. So Terrence, and shout out to Terrence, he said, you'll see, I say here again, I explained this in detail days ago. This is a non-binding ballot initiative. State legislatures co-sponsored this action. So next steps would be for them to sign it into law. Mass care will be on my show next week. I said all this shit. Okay. And so Terrence asked me, like, why did you delete the original tweet? You were right on. So I said here, because people were confused and some people decided to throw attacks as if I organized the effort. I didn't, and I never took credit for it. All I did was share the information. And I got to be honest with you, okay? Anytime someone has reached out to me about direct action, I brought them on the show. Whether I agreed with the strategy or not, I brought them on the show. I don't know anyone who has promoted more events, more direct action events, more initiatives than me. I don't know anyone who has brought on more third-party candidates or independent candidates than me. And I started doing it last year. The nerve of some people. And I gotta say this. Just because you disagree with the strategy doesn't give you the right to fucking attack me personally, period. Some of you need to grow the fuck up. I gotta tell you, this is exactly why shit is not getting done in some of the activist movements. You guys want to attack other activists because they have a different strategy than you. Boo the fuck who? I see why people left your movement. I see why people don't want to work with you because you act like a punk ass bitch. I'm calling it all out. I tried to be very nice, but this has been going on for a while. And what I sure as hell don't need, I don't need to be ganged up on by white progressives trying to tell me what I should or should not say, period. You won't be on here again. Do not contact me. I blocked you and I blocked you for a reason. But it's too much of this shit. It's too much of it. Good luck with your movement. Good luck with your fucking action. Don't call my ass, period. You're on your own. That's it. I'm out. I said what I needed to say. They can say whatever the fuck they want, but I'm going to tell you right now, they barked up the wrong fucking tree. I am not the one. Not. And here's another thing, by the way. Every time an action is led, it doesn't need to always be led by white progressives. Sometimes some of you need to take a step back and let black people lead some of these actions because you be forgetting the fuck about us. And you put our stuff to the bottom of the list. That's it. I said what I said. I'm done. Do not reach out to me ever again. You pissed me off. Period. Have a good weekend. Have a good night. And keep up the fight.